This case takes place in the UK in the year 2023. Kelly Pitt was born and raised in Newport, South Wales, and by her mid-20s, she was a devoted mother of 3. She had 2 daughters, Lauren and Jordan, and a son named Lewis Bush. Kelly's family described her as a loving, caring mother and a devoted nan, an all-round beautiful woman who was kind, thoughtful, funny, and would help anyone who needed it. She doted on her children, and later her young granddaughter. By all accounts, Kelly tried to keep a warm, stable home, even as she faced hardship being a single mother. Sadly, life tested her with tragedy. In April of 2021, Kelly's eldest daughter Lauren died unexpectedly at the age of just 24, a loss which devastated the entire family. Kelly's own health began to decline after Lauren's death, leaving her physically frail and emotionally drained. Still, she never stopped caring deeply for those she loved, even those who caused her the most pain of all, Lewis, Kelly's only son. He was born when Kelly was just a teenager. In his childhood, Lewis attended schools in Newport. There is no public record of significant mental health diagnoses or special educational needs in his youth. But by his mid-teens, he was already getting into trouble. Those who knew Lewis during his adolescence recall a boy who could be polite and even protective of his sisters at times, but he was someone with a worrying streak of anger. But over time, his temper hardened into outright violence. By the age of just 16, Lewis's aggression crossed a line where he physically assaulted Kelly in 2012 by punching her repeatedly. The family was shocked. How could a son do this to his own mother? But Kelly forgave him, likely hoping that this was just a one-off outburst. But in 2013, he did it again. These early acts of domestic violence signaled that Lewis Bush was becoming increasingly dangerous. In his late teens and early 20s, Lewis's life appeared largely aimless. He had no stable employment. If he did work, it was only in short-lived jobs. He often lingered around his mother's home, relying on her for food and money. Lewis felt entitled to Kelly's support, yet simultaneously, he disrespected and belittled her. Over the years, he became known to the neighborhood as a troublemaker. The police were called to the Pitt residence multiple times for disturbances involving Lewis. The records show multiple convictions not only for assaulting his mother, but for also terrorizing his siblings and girlfriends. Remarkably, despite these run-ins with the law, Lewis often faced minimal consequences beyond short stints in custody or community orders. Kelly, out of motherly love, sometimes didn't even press charges to the fullest extent, hoping instead that Lewis would reform. There was a notable shift in Lewis's behaviour after the death of his sister Lauren in April of 2021. It was following this that he lashed out at Kelly more frequently. By early 2023, the situation in the Pitt household had reached a critical point. In one notable incident, Lewis was arrested and charged with assaulting Kelly yet again. A court released him on bail while the case was pending, but they imposed strict conditions. Lewis was forbidden from contacting his mother or going near her home. The legal order was meant to protect Kelly from any further harm. Unfortunately, it would prove to be tragically insufficient. On the 9th of May 2023, Lewis decided to ignore the law and his mother's pleas for peace. Despite being on bail and explicitly banned from visiting Kelly's flat, Lewis showed up at her home that day. When Lewis appeared outside, he was agitated and looking for trouble. He banged on Kelly's windows, demanding to be let in. He was pestering his mother for cash, even though he contributed nothing to the household. Kelly was understandably alarmed. Having her volatile son turn up unannounced was exactly the scenario the court had intended to prevent. However, faced with his persistence, Kelly allowed Lewis inside, likely hoping to defuse the situation without involving the authorities. That evening, and into the next day, tension and fear gripped Kelly's home. The trouble started with something incredibly trivial, a bacon sandwich. Lewis expected his mother to cook for him and became irate when a hot meal wasn't prepared. By the night of the 10th of May, Lewis's temper was spiraling out of control because his mother refused to make him a bacon sandwich. Kelly was exhausted and she was ill, so she just refused his demands. She reportedly snapped and said that she had no obligation to make him food, and he never paid for anything. This mundane domestic argument rapidly escalated into a full-blown confrontation. Shortly after 9 p.m. on the 10th of May, things escalated. Kelly sensed that the situation was becoming dangerous, so she reached out for help in the only way she could at that moment. She called her daughter, Jordan Bush, who lived nearby in Newport. Over a series of urgent phone calls, Jordan suddenly found herself listening to a nightmare unfold in real time. She could hear her brother Lewis shouting and screaming in the background, and her mother crying out in terror. Kelly's voice was frantic as she tried to hold the phone and fend off her son's aggression. She sounded frightened. Jordan caught the horrifying sound of Kelly screaming, "Jord, ring the police." On the other end of the line, 21-year-old Jordan was paralyzed with fear and indecision. This wasn't the first time she had heard her mother and brother in a furious argument. Lewis's outbursts were the norm, as she would later put it. In the past, these altercations would eventually blow over after some harsh words and a few scuffles. Jordan truly believed that this was another one of their regular fights, and it would simmer down by morning. In that panicked moment, Jordan hesitated. She did not call 999. After a few agonizing moments, the phone line went dead. Jordan's heart pounded as she tried calling back, but there was no answer. Throughout that night, Jordan sent a flurry of WhatsApp messages to her mum's phone, begging for a response, but each message went unopened. Jordan tried to convince herself that maybe her mother had fallen asleep or that the situation had indeed just resolved itself, but deep down, a gnawing dread told her that something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, other family members were also concerned. Kelly's extended family knew Lewis's history, and they feared for his safety whenever he was around. Yet none of them knew just how bad things had gotten on this particular night. In the early hours of May the 11th, with no reply from Kelly, Jordan's worry grew. She attempted to reach her mother again that morning. This time, someone had answered Kelly's phone. But it was Lewis on the line. Lewis put on a casual tone. He said that his mum was in bed unwell and was being sick, implying that Kelly couldn't come to the phone because she was ill. He offered reassurances, but they sounded hollow. Jordan was not fully convinced, but she also knew her brother's volatile nature. If Kelly truly was ill, perhaps she didn't want the emergency services barging in. And so, reluctantly, Jordan waited a little longer, clinging to the hope that her mother would get in touch once she felt a little bit better. But unbeknownst to the family, by this time, Kelly was already beyond help. Not long after Kelly's panicked phone call to her daughter on the 10th of May, Lewis cornered Kelly in her bedroom, and he unleashed his pent-up rage upon his own mother. Kelly was punched in the face and head repeatedly, opening cuts on her face and knocking her to the floor. As she tried to crawl or shield herself, Lewis continued the beating. He kicked and stomped on Kelly's body with full force. Lewis then threw his mother against a mirror, causing jagged mirror glass to shatter and the floor around her. Clumps of Kelly's hair and skin were ripped out. Lewis then concentrated blows on her torso. He stomped on her chest so savagely that he fractured 41 of her ribs, which is virtually every rib bone in her body. Many of these ribs snapped completely, with jagged edges puncturing internal tissues and causing massive internal bleeding. Her lungs were punctured by her broken ribs, and her organs began to fail as internal hemorrhaging set in. Bruises covered her skin from head to toe, some on her arms and hands, suggesting that she tried desperately to defend herself from her son. The terror Kelly experienced in her final moments is nothing short of unimaginable. Neighbours later recalled that they hadn't realised a murder was happening next door. One neighbour thought they heard a single scream that night, but they didn't call the police, assuming that it was just another argument between the mother and son. Throughout the frenzied attack, Kelly's mind must have raced with panic. She had already begged her daughter to call the police, but help wasn't coming. Even after Kelly lost consciousness and died, Lewis didn't stop. He continued to beat her. Evidence by post-mortem analysis showed that some injuries occurred after she had died. Instead of calling for an ambulance or attempting any form of rescue, Lewis's next moves were unbelievably cold and calculated, and entirely for self-preservation. As Kelly lay slumped on the bed, he dragged the blood-soaked duvet over Kelly's battered body, covering her up as if to pretend she was simply sleeping. Then, he set about trying to erase evidence of his crime. He tried to mop up his blood-stained footprints and wipe any surface with blood marks on it. However, given the sheer amount of blood from Kelly's injuries, it would have been impossible for any amateur effort to remove all traces. Blood had seeped into the mattress, splattered onto the curtains and onto the walls. Perhaps realizing the futility, Lewis didn't spend too long cleaning up. Instead, he took steps to manufacture a cover-up story. He retrieved Kelly's mobile phone, which had fallen silent after the final call with Jordan. At some point after midnight, he composed and rehearsed a lie. If anyone asked about Kelly, he would claim that she was alive, but ill. With that in mind, he kept the phone near him. Meanwhile, Kelly's body remained in the bed. In the morning of the 11th of May, the aftermath of the murder became a grotesque normality for Lewis. He even took himself on a walk not long after lying to his sister about his mother's state. While out on this stroll, he nonchalantly went and bought himself a beer, a bottle of Stella Artois. CCTV footage captured him that day, strolling through a petrol station shop, and later in the city centre withdrawing cash, showing no signs of remorse or distress for what he had done. Witnesses who saw him in those hours never suspected that this man, just hours before, had brutally tortured and killed his own mother. The crime itself remained undiscovered for almost 2 days. Kelly's daughter Jordan had not heard from her mother since the night of the attack, so she asked her partner Kieran to go and check on Kelly to make sure that she was okay. At around 11:15 a.m, Kieran arrived at Kelly's flat in Newport. The door was unlocked, so he went inside whilst speaking to Jordan on the phone. As he moved through the flat, he described what he was seeing to her. All around he saw broken glass, bloodstains, and signs of struggle. When he reached the bedroom, he found Kelly lying on her back in bed, hidden under a blood-soaked duvet. She was badly bruised, discoloured from the extent of the injuries, and clearly dead. Shaken, Kieran told Jordan what he had found. A neighbour was alerted, and at 11:20 a.m. they phoned the emergency services. Paramedics soon arrived, but of course there was nothing they could do. Kelly was officially pronounced dead. A police investigation was soon underway. The police arrived within minutes from the emergency phone call. First responders were confronted with the grisly scene. They knew right away that they were dealing with a homicide. Detectives described that the early moments of the investigation were emotionally challenging for them all. Seasoned officers were shaken at the sight of a mother so brutally killed in what should have been the safety of her own bedroom. But amidst the shock, investigators swiftly began gathering evidence. From the outset, suspicion fell on Lewis. There were no signs of forced entry to the flat, suggesting that Kelly knew her killer. Family members then informed the police that Lewis had a long history of attacking his mother. This information was a crucial lead. Jordan then told the police about the phone call she had had with her mother. There was little mystery about who might have done this, but the challenge for the police was to find Lewis and gather additional evidence needed to charge him. Police started reviewing CCTV footage from the local area, which proved invaluable. Within just hours, they obtained recordings from the 11th of May and the 12th of May, showing Lewis's movements around town. After this, the case moved quickly. Officers traced Lewis to an address in the Moreland Park area of Newport. At around midnight, police units surrounded his home. Lewis was taken by surprise, and he surrendered without a physical struggle. As he was handcuffed, bodycam video captured a disturbing reaction. Lewis actually smirked and then let out a laugh when officers informed him that he was being arrested on suspicion of murder. One officer recalled him saying, with a mocking tone, "You've got to be joking me." With Lewis in custody, detectives pressed ahead to solidify the case. Lewis had 9 separate interviews, but he refused to cooperate. He exercised his right to remain silent, or offered no comment to every question about his mother's death. Investigators then confronted him with the evidence. But Lewis remained stony-faced, neither confessing nor providing any alternative explanation to his mother's death. But most damning, he didn't shed a single tear when he was informed that his mother had been murdered. Officers noted an absence of normal grief or shock. Lewis's clothing was sent off for forensic analysis, and what they found was damning. They discovered blood in the fibres, and it matched Kelly's DNA. Also, the pattern of spatter on his shoes matched the bloody footprints at the scene. Additionally, tiny cuts on Lewis's hands and bruises on his knuckles were consistent with injuries often seen on perpetrators who engage in prolonged beatings. All signs pointed conclusively to him. By the 17th of May 2023, just 5 days after Kelly's body was found, the police formally charged him with the murder of Kelly. The investigation had moved swiftly, but the emotional toll was immense. As Lewis was led away to a prison cell to await trial, the tragic truth set in. A family had been irreparably shattered from within. From the outset, Lewis denied his guilt. At a plea hearing on the 9th of June 2023, 25-year-old Lewis joined by a video link and only spoke to confirm his name and to say the words, "not guilty." His plea meant that a full criminal trial would be necessary. The trial was set to begin on the 30th of October 2023, and over that time the prosecution engaged in extensive work. They had gathered forensic reports, CCTV, phone records, and would call numerous witnesses, including Kelly's family and neighbours. Meanwhile, the defence requested a psychiatric evaluation of Lewis, suggesting that they might explore issues of mental state or diminished responsibility. But then, as a trial date approached, a significant development occurred. Against all expectations, Lewis Bush changed his plea to guilty. In mid-October of 2023, just days before the trial was due to commence, Lewis formally admitted to the murder of his mother. This spared the family of the ordeal of a full trial. Although again likely this was just for Lewis's own self-preservation. By pleading guilty, Lewis likely hoped for a measure of leniency in sentencing, as courts do consider a guilty plea as a sign of remorse or at least some responsibility. However, it was noted by many that Lewis's plea seemed to be less about genuine remorse and more about pragmatism. In fact, throughout the court proceedings, he showed absolutely no remorse about anything. He had killed and tortured his own mother, he had torn apart his entire family, and yet he didn't even care at all. The sentencing hearing took place on the 10th of November 2023 at Newport Crown Court, and, by all accounts, it was an emotional and dramatic session. The courtroom was filled with Kelly's grieving relatives and family, many of whom had prepared themselves to face the man responsible for her death, her son. The prosecution opened with a stark recounting of the crime. They described the attack on Kelly as ferocious and sustained. They showed evidence of the post-mortem, which included 41 broken ribs and extreme trauma to her entire body. The prosecution proved how he intended to kill his mother, as after she fell unconscious and died, he continued to beat her viciously. The defense had little to mitigate the horror of the crime. The defense representing Lewis pointed out that he had ultimately pleaded guilty, trying to claim that this was a sign of his remorse. However, Lewis himself did not make any apology or even a personal statement of remorse to the court. Instead, he remained mostly silent in the dock, head often bowed. According to observers, he did not meet the eyes of the family once, even as they spoke about the devastation he had caused. Then, his sister-daughter read out a victim impact statement. She said, "You, Lewis, have taken the most special person in my life, my mum. She was caring, loving, and the kindest person you would ever meet. Throughout our lives, you bullied our mother, Lauren, and me." Jordan then declared, "I have no mum, sister, and now I have no brother. You are no brother of mine after what you have done." Following this, the judge declared the sentence. Lewis was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of just 16 years. To many in the courtroom, especially Kelly's family, 16 years felt far too little for the gravity of the crime. Lewis was asked if he had anything to say, but he just simply shook his head, and with this, Lewis was taken away. Following the murder and the trial, Jordan spoke about how deeply her mother's death had affected her. The case became a warning in campaigns against domestic abuse, with police urging victims and witnesses to seek help before it's too late. As for Lewis, he still to this day shows no remorse, and he may be free by 2039 in his 40s. For many, they believe that this is no justice at all.